But I want to talk about stylistically this matchup because I think it's a very good one. And I think there's a winnable path for both men, Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev. We know what Khamzat's going to bring to the table. He's going to bring extreme pace and pressure grappling, at least for the first 10 minutes of the fight. It's almost impossible to avoid Khamzat's takedowns in the first round. Just look at Kamaru Usman, for example. Kamaru was running like a 98% takedown defense accuracy going into the Khamzat fight. And I think his accuracy, if I'm not mistaken, was about 65% against Khamzat. So still excellent. I mean, still Kamaru was able to defend a lot of the grappling onslaught from Khamzat Chimaev, but not nearly as well as he was against all of the other opponents combined that he ever has faced in his career thus far. So Robert Whittaker, while he has the skills and he's, as good as Kamaru in my opinion, and certainly, is not taking this fight on 10 or 12 days notice, is going to be a very tough opponent in there. I don't believe that he's going to be able to defend the takedown as well as Kamaru did.
Yeah.
Just because he's not, he doesn't come from that NCAA wrestling pedigree like Usman does.
Yeah.
He's got a little bit different of a style, and he makes it work. Not to say that Whittaker doesn't have great takedown defense. He also has great jiu-jitsu, but it's not going to be to the level of Usman. So I do expect to see Robert Whittaker on the canvas having to wrestle up, having to try to look for sweeps and exchanges and create some scrambles and stuff like that. So how well does Robert Whittaker handle getting up off the canvas? That's going to be a big question for me, because I think it's inevitable that he gets there. Now, the other side of that coin is Khamzat Chimaev comes straight forward at you, almost with no respect to your striking.
Right.
Right from the beginning of the fight, you can almost predict what Khamzat's going to do in the first 30 seconds of the fight. He's coming straight across the cage. He's going to feint. He's going to look for a level change, and he's going to try to get you to the ground. Now, why that could be problematic for Khamzat, Robert Whittaker throws two shots really, really well. One is a very short front hook that he throws. He's put quite a few very good fighters out with that shot. Mm-hmm. And the other is a high kick that he lands from extremely close range. It's almost like him and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson are the two I've only seen really land that with a high level of accuracy in recent memory in the UFC, because when you're in close range, the general consensus is that if a kick's coming, it's going to be low, but you're more than likely going to clinch up and throw some knees. And while Whittaker can do that, he does throw a high kick extremely well.
Yeah.
And, I think he could potentially hurt Khamzat with that. So Khamzat has to be very careful and calculated with how he comes in on Robert Whittaker. And I think he does need to come in, because I think if this fight becomes a kickboxing match, especially over 5 rounds, Robert Whittaker is a proven commodity over 25 minutes. We know he's going to be strong in the 4th round. We know he's going to be strong in the 5th round. And while we haven't seen Khamzat in the 4th or 5th round before, he has shown us some tendencies that would lead us to believe that he's not going to be as strong in the 4th or 5th round. So for Khamzat, it's stay safe. Keep yourself engage in the fire on your terms. Watch out for that hook. Watch out for those unorthodox kicks that can hit you from weird angles, and get Robert Whittaker down and start to bank the rounds. Look for your finish, and most importantly, try to take a little bit of gas out of the tank of a guy who's got an incredible gas tank.
Yeah, and you have to remember that Khamzat Chimaev, like every other fighter, has their style. They have their abilities, and they know what they do best. There's almost nothing as scary in the UFC as Khamzat Chimaev in the first round. He's shown us even at 185 that he's got a lot of power, and in the first round and even a little bit in the second round, he throws a lot of volume. He's really good at mixing up the takedowns. This is MMA that we're talking about. And while his striking is very good and his grappling is very good, the way he combines the two together and seamlessly flows between them is also very masterful. And a lot of people might not catch that. They might let it just, go over their head, and they'll see like, oh man, he's throwing some great strikes. Oh, and now he's wrestling. But there's some great seamless transitions that he's able to implement, especially early in the fight. And that's what makes him so dangerous. He's the kind of guy that throws a head kick and then changes levels right after that before his foot even touches the ground. And then he's able to shoot in on you, and he's figured out the distance and space that he needs to make that effective. And that's why I think Robert Whittaker has to be very, very careful in the early parts of this fight. I would be willing to concede the first round to Khamzat Chimaev and just be on your bike. Just let him get himself a little bit tired. Let that initial adrenaline sort of, slip out of Khamzat's body, and then start to implement your game plan later in the second round and then as the fight goes on. But if you go in there and try to match pace with Khamzat in the first round, if you go in there and try to, throw the same sort of volume as him in the first round, you're likely going to get touched. You're likely going to get hurt, and then you're going to wind up on the ground, and then that's the kind of setup that Khamzat needs to get himself a 10-8 round. If Khamzat can do some damage on the feet early on in the first round and then get you to the ground and beat you up with that bludgeoning ground and pound that he's known for, and even some submission attempts that he's pretty solid at throwing in the very early parts of the fight when his opponent's still fresh, that can set you up to be fighting from way behind on the scorecards. And now you're a depleted guy, because MMA is one of those sports where you can't just lay on the ground like you can in jiu-jitsu and be okay. You are losing badly when your back's on the ground.
And getting hit.
Yeah, and now you're getting beat up. And so you're exhausting yourself more so than the guy that is on top of you is exhausting himself on when he's striking you and going for submission. So Robert Whittaker might have to. And look, he's got a great team, so I don't need to tell him. I don't need to coach him. But he's got a lot of skills, and he's got a huge arsenal of strikes, and he's very good at keeping the fight where he wants it. And he's got those push kicks. He's really sharp with the couple of strikes you talked about, the close hook and the head kick. But he's also just really solid at staying in the pocket and throwing back. And that's one thing that stuck out to me when we saw Khamzat Chimaev against Kamaru Usman. Now, Kamaru Usman only came in on 9 or 10 days notice, and while he wasn't prepared the way he would probably like to prepare for a fight against a guy like Khamzat Chimaev, he didn't have that stress of a full 3-month camp. And I think he was just looking to go out there and see if he could last all 15 minutes. And then he realized at the end of the third round, damn, I had a little bit more gas in the tank. I could have come a little bit stronger. I think that Khamzat Chimaev is the type of guy where if you do have a 5-round fight against him, you can have a bit of a slow burn and you can let him take that first round, because at the end of the day, we're talking about a 10-9 must system. We're talking about somebody who comes out and hasn't lost the first round in an MMA fight probably ever, and I don't really see that happening anytime soon for Khamzat. So you have to understand, look, I'm not going to go out in the first round. I'm not going to get submitted. I'm not going to get knocked out, but I'm going to need to be very cautious and very careful, because he's going to come with a whole lot of attacks. And I think if Robert Whittaker plays a patient game, it betters his chances of winning. I'm not saying that Khamzat Chimaev becomes an easier fight as the fight goes on. I'm just saying that the volume that he throws in round 2, 3, and so on is much less, I would say almost 50% less than what he throws in the first round.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the biggest thing for Robert Whittaker in the early part of the fight is obviously don't get knocked out or submitted. That's a given. But avoid the 10-8 at all cost and keep your energy, because I agree with you. There's a 0% chance that Robert Whittaker is going to win the first round against Khamzat Chimaev.
Right.
If he can have even a similar takedown defense ratio to Kamaru, like 65%, or even if it's 50-50, I think that's going to bode well in his favor to cause Khamzat to have to expend a little energy looking for that takedown. And then if he can keep the damage to a minimum when he's on the ground, that's going to bode really well in his favor as well. And he can sort of bide his time. If he can stay, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, Usain Bolt. Nobody's going to beat him in a 100-meter or 200-meter run, period, end of story. But if you're the guy that runs the 400 or the 800 and you take off from the start line with Usain Bolt, you don't have to be ahead of him at meter number 100. You don't have to be ahead of him at meter number 200. But if you can just stay close enough, if you let him get too far ahead, no matter how well you do on the backstretch, you're not going to catch up to him. But if you can be just a little bit behind him, maybe you won one of the first 3 rounds and you didn't take too much damage, and now across the cage you're looking at Khamzat and he's breathing a little heavily, his mouth is open, and it's like, okay, now's game time for Robert Whittaker. Now it's time to step on the gas. Right. And if he can grab those last 2 rounds or even get a finish in the last 2 rounds, that's going to be Rob's best chance. So it's avoid the damage early, snag one of the first 3 rounds, avoid the 10-8 at all costs. And don't expend too much energy looking for that victory in the first round. This is a marathon, not a sprint if you're Robert Whittaker.
Yeah, great points. And I predict that we're going to see a lot of wrestling attempts from Khamzat Chimaev, which is going to open up some wrestling scrambles from Robert Whittaker.
Yes.
And Robert, of course, America has a better pedigree of wrestling than Australia does. But Robert Whittaker is a high-level grappler. He loves to wrestle. He's like in the wrestling rooms with the young guys teaching, and then he's in the jiu-jitsu room. So he's very familiar with the ground game. But, as we find out many, many times over, not all black belts are created equally. Not all wrestlers are created equally. And that's why the great middle road for all of this is MMA, because wrestling and MMA is just different. It's not the same as jiu-jitsu. It's not the same as traditional wrestling, whether it's Greco or freestyle or Roman, whatever. It's a very different game, and you have to understand when Khamzat Chimaev goes in there to take Robert Whittaker down, you're going to see some good scrambling out of Robert Whittaker. I'm not sure he's going to be able to keep Khamzat off of him the whole time. Think back to the Kevin Holland fight. Kevin just could not seem to get away from him. And he was doing everything right until he got submitted.
Yeah.
The Granby rolls, the way he was trying to make reversals happen, utilizing the momentum that Khamzat was bringing into the cage, all that stuff was very important. It just so happened that Khamzat Chimaev knew exactly what step Kevin was going to take, because they both understand the bodies and when they're connected together and when they're in these grappling exchanges, what needs to happen. And it's almost like a chess game at that point. As long as you're 2 steps ahead of the person that you're trying to control, you're going to continue to control them. But MMA makes it a little bit different, and I would have liked to seen Kevin Holland throw a little bit more strikes and offense in those scrambling moments, because it could have created a little bit more space, a little more distance, and a little bit more opportunity for him to find an escape out of the grips of Khamzat Chimaev. Robert Whittaker is very, very talented when it comes to striking in the scramble. When he's, when you're mixing it up with somebody and you're not in boxing range, you're not in kickboxing range, and you guys aren't tied up totally, but maybe somebody's got a 50-50 over-under hook and you've matched it with them, or maybe they try to get double unders on you. There's some interesting things that can take place there. And high-level MMA guys are really good at finding nice little quick shots and damaging strikes from in those clinch and wrestling clinch style situations. And that's what Khamzat might need to watch out for, because Robert's very crafty. He's a veteran. He knows how to look for those types of things. And he's fought people with similar skill sets to Khamzat Chimaev. So while they're going to dissect the game plan of Khamzat Chimaev and they're going to watch all the tape and see what they can do, I have a feeling Robert Whittaker knows his hands are going to be full with bores. And I have a feeling if he goes in there and is willing to take the fight wherever Khamzat goes, and then flip the switch on him and then take the fight over and then take the fight where he wants it to go, it's like a dance. You lead for a little while and then I'll lead for a little while. That would be his best chance of winning, because if you try to force Khamzat to not do what he wants to do, you're going to be stuck, and then you're going to get a little bit unmotivated. You're going to be looking for
it can be a
answers.
Frustrating place to be.
Very frustrating when nothing's working that you thought was going to work and your defense isn't working. Sometimes you just have to let the fight unravel and play out the way it's going to play out. And as long as you can take charge and take control of it at some points, then you can find some success. But if you go in there like, I'm not going to let him take me down, I'm not going to let him do this with me, and then he does it, then you're like, now I can't stop him from taking me to the ground. Now I can't stop him from putting this barrage of punches on me. Now I can't slow the volume down. And that's the type of stuff that Robert Whittaker has the experience to avoid. But Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion, style and his pressure and his pace is so hard to prepare for. And even if you do everything right, you've got a great team behind you to figure it out during camp, it's really difficult to navigate once you are actually locked in a cage with Khamzat. I believe Khamzat has the skills to be the champion of the middleweight division. I think on any given night, he could be the best fighter in the world. He's the hottest prospect the UFC has on their entire roster. And I'm really excited for this fight because it feels like the perfect next test for Khamzat Chimaev. People want to see him in there with the elite 185ers in the world. Robert Whittaker embodies that to a T. There's nobody more elite at middleweight besides the world champion than Robert Whittaker. So if Khamzat's able to do this, like you said early in the video, history says he will be the champ.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give a quick early prediction.
Okay.
I do think he's going to be able to do enough to get his hand raised.
Yeah.
I feel like the word undeniable, it's Khamzat's time right now. This fight's taking place in Saudi Arabia. The card is being built around him. I believe that he has it within him to rise to the occasion. I believe this is going to be the hardest fight of his life. I think it's going to be harder than the Kamaru Usman fight. I believe it's going to be harder than the Gilbert Burns fight, and I think he's going to have to dig very deep and show us a layer of resilience that we maybe didn't even know that he had.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to rise to the occasion. I think it's Khamzat's time.
I totally agree. And the selfish side of me does kind of want to see this go into the championship rounds. Obviously, both guys are very good at getting the fight finished early on, whether it's on the ground or it's on the feet. But the selfish side of me does kind of want to see this go into the championship rounds because I think there will be some interesting things that unravel. You know, maybe it goes Robert Whittaker's way towards the end. Maybe Khamzat Chimaev shows the world that, hey, I'm not just a good starter, but I'm really good at finishing as well.
I can't wait to see.